Section 8.2, GCF and grouping. All right, we're going to learn some more about factoring here. We're going to factor by factoring out the greatest common factor, and then we're going to learn something called factor by grouping. All right, so greatest common factor looks kind of like this. I might have the polynomial 3x plus 15. And what you do is you look at the polynomial and you look for things that each term has in common. And what I mean by that is, here I see a 3, and here I see a 15. 15 can be written as 3 times 5. So they have something in common. I can kind of use the distributive property backward. I write the 3 out here, and then my distributive property would tell me I need to have x plus 5. Because 3 times x plus 5, use the distributive property, you get 3x plus 15. Now, sometimes you have numbers that you can factor, but also sometimes letters. So this time I look at my numbers, 18 and 12. 18 and 12 have 6 in common. And then I notice that each term has x's. I get an x cubed and an x squared. So when I notice that both of them have x's, I can take out an x, and the power you will use will always be the smallest. So there's my common term. My common term is 6x squared. And then again, I kind of think about my distributive property. 6x squared times what will give me 18x cubed? Well, I need 6 times 3 to get 18, and then I need x squared times x to get x cubed. Minus 6x squared times what gives me my 12x squared? That would just be a 2. All right, so here's how you're going to kind of use this factor by grouping in general. We're going to, whenever we see a factor problem, the first thing we're always going to look for is to factor by grouping. So whenever you see the word factor, I'm sorry, not factor by grouping, step 1, look for a greatest common factor. And always pull that out first. Step 2, if you have a binomial, which means you only have 2 pieces, you go for one of those special formulas that we had last time. If you have 3 pieces, if you have a trinomial, this was the reverse FOIL that we did the other day. And if you have 4 terms, that's when we do something called grouping, and we'll get to that here in a few minutes. All right, so let's start with something like factor 3x squared minus 75. Well, the first thing I do is I always look for a greatest common factor. I notice that I have a 3 in common. So I write 3 down, and then left over would be x squared minus 25. Now this new piece that I have here, this is a binomial. So I look to see, does it fit into one of my special formulas? I notice it does. This one has square minus square. So this is going to factor more. Square minus square factors this way. It will be x minus 5, x plus 5. So that's what you're going to have to do in a lot of these problems. You're going to factor once by taking out the greatest common factor, and then you'll factor again using what we did last time. Let's try this one. How about 2t cubed minus 12t squared minus 32t. All right, well, this time I have 3 pieces, but I look at my numbers. I have a 2, a 12, and a 32. 2 and 12 and 32 all have 2 in common. And then I notice that every piece has a t. I've got a t cubed, a t squared, and a t. I take my smallest power, that's t. All right, now my distributive property. 2t times t squared gives me my t cubed, my 2t cubed. And then 2t times minus 6t will give me my 12t squared. And then I think I need a minus 16, because 2t times minus 16 will give me minus 32. Well, I look what I have left. I have t squared minus 6t minus 16. That's a trinomial. So I write my 2t down, and then this is going to factor as 2 binomials. It's got to be t and t. Not too many ways to get 16 on the end. I think the one that I want is 8 and 2. And I think I want a minus 8 and a positive 2, because those two will work together to give me the negative 6 in the middle and the negative 16 on the end. Okay, so that's what your first group of problems is going to look like. You're going to factor out the greatest common factor, and then you're going to factor what's left using the stuff we did previously. All right, so let's talk about the new thing here. The new thing is grouping. And as it says up above, you'll use grouping anytime you see that you have a polynomial and your polynomial has 4 terms. So 12r squared, or 12r cubed, I mean, plus 3r squared plus 8r plus 2. Okay, I still always look for the greatest common factor, but this time I notice my numbers. I got a 12, a 3, an 8, and a 2. There's nothing that 12, 3, 8, and 2 have in common other than the number 1. So that doesn't help a whole lot. Then I look at my letters. I've got an r cubed, an r squared, and r, but then down on the end there's no r down there. So I don't have any number in common. I also don't have any letter in common. So there's no common factor I can pull out. All right, so I notice I have 4 pieces. When I have 4 pieces, after I've tried my greatest common factor, what I do is I group them in pairs. That's why it's called grouping. We group the 2 things in pairs. Now look at my first group. My first group has 12r cubed plus 3r squared. There's a common term there. I take out the 3r squared. Left over would be 4r, because 3r squared times 4r will give me 12r cubed, plus 1, because 3r squared times 1 gives me 3r squared. Now I go to my second group and I do the same thing. 8r and 2 have a 2 in common. So I put the 2 out front. It would have to be, oops, it's an ugly looking 4, but that's a 4. 4r plus 1. Now, if I've done it right, this and that should always match. Exactly. Always match exactly. And I'll see sometimes where students will make a mistake. They'll have a 4r plus 1 and a 4r minus 1 and try to do something with it. You can't. They have to match exactly. So what I do is I notice I have a 4r plus 1 here and a 4r plus 1 over there on the right. So I write down 4r plus 1. That's my common term. 4r plus 1 here, 4r plus 1 there. There's my common term. So I factor that out front. And then what's left over is a 3r squared and a plus 2. So there we go. There's my answer. There's how I factor it. All right, I'm going to do one more of these. I'm going to purposely make a mistake, so you'll see what I mean about things being exactly the same. 6b cubed minus 10b squared minus 21b plus 35. Once again, I look for a common term. My numbers, 6, 10, 21, 35, nothing in common. And there's not a b in every single one. All right, so pay attention to this one. Like I said, I'm going to make a mistake on purpose. 6b cubed minus 10b squared minus 21b plus 35. So I factor by grouping. I put my things in pairs. What comes out of the first group? Well, let's see, 6 and 10. 6 and 10 has a 2 in common. B cubed and B squared has B squared in common. Left over would be 3B, because 3B times 2B squared gives me the 6B cubed, minus 5, because 5 times 2B squared would give me 10B squared. Minus 21 and 35 have a 7 in common, so I put the 7 down front. 3b, because 7 times 3 is 21, plus 5. At this point, you should stop, and you should say, something's wrong. And what's wrong is that this thing and that thing are not exactly the same. You made a mistake. In this case, I made a mistake. But that's how you recognize it. They're different. This one has a minus. This one has a plus. That tells you goofed up. All right, so I'm going to go back, and I'm going to do this problem again, and I will show you where I made my mistake. But I think that's important for you to see that this is the mistake that most people are going to make on these problems. All right, so 6b cubed minus 10b squared minus 21b plus 35. My mistake actually was right on the very first step. 6b cubed minus 10b squared. I put those together, that's fine. The mistake is I put a minus outside my parenthesis here, which is okay. 21b, and this would have to be minus 35, and here's why. If I put the minus out here, think of your distributive property. A minus and another minus gives me that plus back at the beginning that we needed. Okay, so here's the thing you need to watch out for. If you're going to put this minus sign outside here, outside the parentheses, this sign inside the parentheses has to change. Minus and a minus to get back to the plus. And that's the most common mistake people make on these. Now it works out just fine, because now I take the 2b squared out, and I'm left with 3b minus 5. Minus, I take the 7 out, and I have 3b minus 5. Now I'm happy, because now this and that match perfectly. Okay, so there's the mistake you got to watch out for. Watch out for if you put the minus inside the outside of the parentheses, which you should. That minus right there that I put outside the parentheses is correct. It forces the sign in the middle to change. All right, so I write down my 3b minus 5, and then left over would be a 2b squared and a minus 7. And there it is, I'm all done. Okay, so there's greatest common factors, and there's factoring by grouping. Now, the big question you should have is, what are we doing all this factoring for? Go to section 8.3 and you'll see.